Back. This is Bottom Line Africa. Now, the demonstrations sweeping across the world today signal that despite unprecedented progress against poverty, hunger and disease, many societies are not working as they should. And the connecting thread, argues a new report from the United Nations Development Programme, is inequality. Now, I want us to have that conversation, but before we do that, let's just take a look at some of the findings of the 2019 Human Development Report, which is dubbed Beyond Income, Beyond Averages, Beyond Today, Inequalities in Human Development in the 21st Century, which mainly looks at the 3 points and analyzes them, that is beyond income, averages and today. So let's take a look at thinking beyond income, which is basically set out that an equal distribution of education, health and living standards stimulate countries' progresses. Now, the report therefore recommends policies that look also go beyond income, including early childhood and lifelong investment, which it states inequality begins even before childbirth and can accumulate, amplified by differences in health and education into adulthood. It also talks about productivity, still on the thinking beyond point. Productivity, which is said such investments must continue through a person's life when they are earning in the labor market and after, and also public spending and fair taxation. Now, we'll look at these points in depth, but let's just go to the next point, which is looking beyond averages. And they say averages often hide what is really going on in society. While they can be helpful in telling a larger story, much more detailed information is needed to create policies to tackle inequality effectively. And they look at gender equality in specific. And it is also said that based on the current trends, it will take 202 years to close the gender gap in economic opportunity alone. And the third point, which is planning beyond today, how inequality may change in future, looking particularly at two seismic shifts that will shape life up to the 22nd century, and they look at climate change and technological transformation. Now, we want to have that conversation here in studio, and joining me, I'll start from my far left, which is Walid Badawi, who is the UNDP Kenya resident representative, and to my immediate left, that is Rogers Liwayo, UNDP Kenya Economic Advisors. I hope I got it right, gentlemen. Yeah. Welcome, and thank you very much for making time to join us here on the Bottom Line Africa. So I'll just start with what the report begins by saying. Demonstrations sweeping across the world today signal that despite unprecedented progress against poverty, hunger and disease, many societies are not working as they should. So how exactly is inequality and poverty and hunger tied together?
Yes. Thank you, Ashley, and thank you for having us on your show and giving us an opportunity to share a little bit more about the report, and we'll leave a copy with you, of course.
Thank you.
That was launched on the 9th of December in Bogota, Colombia, by the President of Colombia and the UNDP Administrator, Mr. Akim Steiner. But let me step back for a second, because it's important to contextualize this report in a series of reports that UNDP has been publishing around human development since 1990. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we say in UNDP in terms of changing the policy discourse on development globally, these human development reports played a key role. Why? Because around in the late 80s, the discussion around development centered around income. Mm-hmm. and GNI per capita and how much money are being generated. And the introduction of our first Human Development Report in 1990 really shifted the needle around the conversation on development to inject additional factors, including education and health, in addition to income, which is crucial. Mm-hmm. And those three composite indicators that are being tracked and have been tracked consistently since 1990 has actually ensured that discussion moves beyond income. Mm-hmm. And that's also why the title of this year's report is titled Beyond Income, Beyond Averages, and Beyond Today. Mm-hmm. Now, moving very directly to the core messages of this report, we felt that the issue of inequality is a stifling factor impeding development, very significantly, and you've referred to many of the statistics. But the report presents 5 core messages around those 3 themes of income averages and today. The first core message of the report is that globally, as we've been tracking development, and Kenya is no exception to that, countries have made significant progress in addressing some of the basic needs around education, nutrition, health. So this is a very good thing, but there are still very widespread inequalities within countries, within geographical locations, in countries, and certainly globally across countries. And that is why the Sustainable Development Goals has a very direct goal addressing inequalities, Goal 10, but not only as a single goal, it is through SDG 1, SDG 2, SDG 3, across the whole spectrum, there are specific indicators that talk about inequalities in accessing education, inequalities, and you talked about gender. So the SDGs actually are essentially around addressing this inequality. So the first message is countries have done well on basic inequalities, but widespread disparities occur. The second core message is that there are a new generation of inequalities that are emerging. And you have on the screen, and you've projected issues around technological advancement and how are countries and even communities within countries taking advantage of the technological revolution in equal ways. And can this perpetuate future inequalities if not addressed today? So there's that second message about the new generation of inequalities. The third message of the report is around the fact that inequality happens across the lifespan, not just when you're working in the working age and how income levels from a job that you have are affecting you. This could happen to you predisposed based on the social status in which a person is born. So you're preordained to perpetuate a certain level of inequality simply by factors outside your immediate control. So we see inequality as a life cycle issue. The fourth message of the report is really around the fact that looking and addressing it will require investments in new measurement tools. I spoke briefly about the Human Development Index, which we introduced in 1990. But throughout the years, the evolution in statistics and being able to very directly target segments of the population, whether they're women, whether they're children, whether they're in a certain county, and the ability to look at dissecting data is necessary, and we're not quite there yet globally. The absence of very clear measurement tools to be able to come up with the policy responses is insufficient. The fifth and final message of the report is really around the fact that we can take matters into our own hands as policymakers, as governments, to actually address inequality. So it's not too late, but we need to act now.
All right, and we will get through all those 5 points, but let's start at the beginning. You have mentioned that, of course, progress has been made and inequalities happened in a lifespan. And I will start with the point of thinking beyond income. And there were some policies that were recommended. But then the issues with policies is we have so many policies in the world, but implementing them is a problem. So then even when it comes to the future and going forward, how do we make sure that policies are implemented in the right way, not only in Kenya, but worldwide? Rogers.
I think when you come to policies, I think one thing which comes out of the report is this issue of universalism in terms of even provision of public services, access to education, access to health, and also access to water and sanitation. And I think these are crucial going forward. But then you tend to find that universalism does not address most of the issues. So you also need targeting. How do you target the vulnerable groups? And I think that's where some countries have been quite innovative coming up with social protection. And I think one country which has been very good in actually implementing social protection is Brazil. And if one looks at the trajectory of Brazil since they introduced social protection, it has actually gone a long way in addressing inequality, even the issues of minimum wages, and also the issue of actually tackling inequality from the very young age, like early childhood development. And also, how can we, the issue of technology, how can we leverage technology to actually make sure that we address this issue of inequality? Because, you know, technology is a good servant, but it can be a good master.
Yes.
I always give people a good example of like M-Pesa. M-Pesa actually has done a great deal of bringing this issue of financial inclusion. But I think you also have this problem that now people can borrow using M-Pesa. And it happened to me one day when I sent money by mistake to somebody when I was paying a taxi. And when I tried to do a reversal, I was told the money has already been used. I called this person and he told me I had Fuliza, so the money has already gone. So I think this issue, we also need to address these adverse effects of technology and also the issue of even, legislation. How can we actually make sure that technology works for the people? Because much as it increases productivity, much as it also brings in other new jobs, it also has a displacement effect. So how can we harness technology to work better for the people?
Okay.
I think it's quite crucial. And also, how can we make government policies, the issue of fiscal policies, much more effective, and even taxation policies, so that we address actually, inequality?
So then how do we leverage technology?
Well, I think we can leverage technology, but coming back to your point again, moving from policy to implementation, and I think one of the key things that needs to happen in this space is really to look at how budgets are formulated at both national and subnational levels. Because if you do not see the direct financial translation of a certain policy into the financing framework through medium-term expenditure frameworks of countries, there will be a disconnect. That's one critical variable to ensure that we are able to move from policy to implementation. And the very meticulous monitoring of that translation of policy into practice is very often overlooked. And you look at priority programs, and when you come to measure them against the policy imperatives, you will find disconnects. This is one crucial area. The second one that I think is key to move implementation is the degree of public participation in policy formulation. If the structures for planning and development of policies that address education or health or nutrition, you do not have the direct beneficiaries involved in the formulation process, invariably when it comes to implementation, there will be a disconnect. And therefore, public participation and engagement so that those policies, as well-intentioned as they may be, are actually responsive enough to the specific needs are another area that I think requires attention. And third is the issues around monitoring and evaluation. We see very often the capacities, whether it's in subnational government or national government, to ensure the monitoring and the implementation against very specific indicators of progress are very often missing. The SDG framework itself proposes 231 indicators across the 17 SDGs and the 169 targets. To what extent are those indicators then reflected into national and county integrated development plans, for example, so that they can be monitored? Those are sometimes the disconnects that affect implementation policy.
So then, to those watching us and to those who we are here, how do we take matters into our own hands?
No, I think also the issue which is quite important is also, I think also the role of youth, I think is quite important when we actually try to address most of the development challenges which affect countries. And, youth tend not to participate even in politics and so on. So I think, society needs to engage their governments to make sure that what they want to be addressed is actually reflected in national development plans. And I think also at the household level, I think the issue which you raised earlier on gender, I think is quite crucial. How do we address the issue of gender even at the household level? Because I think, some household level tend to give much more preference to the boy child. And I think we need to actually to make sure that our community actually make sure that, both children are quite important because, and also making sure that women play a huge part in political decision making.
Yeah.
Because if you look at even, we have made a lot of progress in the capabilities in terms of gender. But when you look at enhancing capabilities, even women in executive boards of companies, even in political making decisions, I think to me it's quite critical because, empirical evidence has shown that when women are involved in decision making, political decision making, the policies they make tend to be much more inclusive. And even if you look at most boards headed by women, the companies which are actually headed by women tend to actually address most of the challenges of even the environment, governance, and so on. Yeah.
But it's alarming because it states that the progress in gender equality, especially in women, is actually slowing down. For me, that was alarming because people think they're actually making progress. So does it mean we're taking steps forward and 10 back? Briefly, as we conclude.
That is indeed the message. I think exactly as you phrased it, and that requires a much more robust intervention across public and private sectors to ensure that the right policy incentives and the right business practices are incentivized to actually ensure that that regression does not continue.
All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Rogers Liwayo, who is the UNDP Kenya Economic Advisor, and Walid Badawi, who is the UNDP Kenya Resident Representative. Thank you very much for having this conversation with us. To our images